The history of the world is rife with events like Watergate, Dunkirk, and the Titanic that can be described in one sentence. There is one that, even to this day, fills the mind with a plethora of damaging imagery and connotation when it comes to creating thoughts of dread, and Chernobyl is the word. Watch this video to find out about the real destruction of Chernobyl. The Chernobyl tragedy, which occurred in 1986 at the Chernobyl nuclear power facility in the Soviet Union, was the biggest disaster in the history of nuclear power generation. The Chernobyl power station was located in the village of Pripyat, 16 kilometers northwest of the city of Chernobyl and 104 kilometers north of Kyiv, Ukraine. The station contained 4 reactors, each capable of producing 1,000 megawatts of electricity. It had been operational from 1977 to 1983. On April 25 through 26, 1986, personnel at Reactor Unit 4 conducted an ill-conceived experiment. Workers turned off the reactor's power control system and emergency safety systems, and they removed the majority of the control rods from its core while keeping the reactor running at 7% power. These errors were exasperated by others, and the chain reaction in the core blew out of control at 1:23 a.m. on April 26th. Several explosions created a massive firestorm that blasted off the reactor's heavy steel and concrete cover. This, along with the subsequent fire in the graphite reactor core, discharged a considerable amount of radioactive material into the sky, where it was carried over long distances by air currents. The core also partially melted. Hundreds of people died in the immediate aftermath, and thousands more were killed in the following years. The incident emitted 400 times the amount of radiation into the atmosphere as the Hiroshima atomic bomb and contaminated vast areas of nearby land. The evacuation of Pripyat of 30,000 people began on April 27th. A cover-up attempt was made, but on April 28th, Swedish monitoring stations revealed unusually high levels of wind-transported radiation and demanded an explanation. The Soviet authorities confessed there had been an accident at Chernobyl, igniting an international outpouring of concern about the dangers posed by radioactive emissions. Radioactive debris was buried at approximately 800 temporary locations, and the highly radioactive reactor core was sealed in a concrete and steel sarcophagus later that year. Several days after the accident on May 4, 1986, mechanical engineer Alexei Ananenko, senior engineer Valery Bespalov, and shift supervisor Boris Baranov came forward to perform a mission that many believed was suicide. They were told that if they did not survive, their families would be taken care of. The success of their mission would determine the fate of millions of people. Its enormity was unsurpassed and represented one of history's greatest sliding doors moments. On the day of the tragedy, firemen sprayed water into the nuclear reactor to try to put out the raging fire. One of the negative effects was that radioactive water inundated the basement. This basement housed the valves that, when turned, drained the bubbler pools that sat beneath the reactor and served as a cooling system for the plant. Over the next few days, it was discovered that hot radioactive material was melting through the concrete reactor floor and slowly descending into the pools below. If the lava-like fluid came into touch with the water, it would generate a radiation-contaminated steam explosion, destroying the entire plant as well as its 3 additional reactors, producing unthinkable damage and nuclear fallout from which the world would struggle to recover. The pools, which held approximately 20 million liters of water, had to be drained, and the only way to do so was by physically closing the appropriate valves in the now flooded basement. Few people realize, however, that the magnitude of destruction could have been significantly greater if 3 heroic volunteers had not stepped forward. If the 3 brave men were not successful in their mission, the death toll from the Chernobyl disaster would most certainly be in the millions. The detonation would have had a force of 3 to 5 megatons, rendering much of Europe uninhabitable for hundreds of thousands of years, according to nuclear physicist Vasily Nestorenko. The 3 volunteers dived into the darkness of the basement below, dressed in wetsuits and equipped only with a flashlight, in quest of the vital valves. The events that follow have become a modern legend. For decades, it was widely reported that the three men swam through radioactive water in near darkness, miraculously located the valves even after their flashlight died, and escaped, but that they were already showing signs of acute radiation syndrome and died of radiation poisoning a short time later. They were buried in lead coffins, according to the evidence. As we learned from Andrew Leatherbarrow's book Chernobyl 12340 in 2016, he spent 5 years researching the accident. He discovered a somewhat different but equally heroic series of events. The basement was flooded with radioactive water, but firefighters had already drained some of it out, so the water was only knee-deep when the men jumped in. Others had already gone into the basement to monitor the radiation levels, so they weren't the first to enter. However, little is known about what happened to these folks. The men entered the basement in wetsuits, radioactive water up to their knees, in a corridor filled with a plethora of pipes and valves. It was like locating a needle in a haystack, Leatherbarrow said of the discovery of the valves. Nonetheless, they discovered the needle before the molten reactor core above them melted its way through the roof. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. In the Soviet press, Anonenko was quoted as saying, "Everyone at Chernobyl nuclear power station was witness to that operation. We were overjoyed when the searchlight beam dropped on a pipe. The pipe led to the valves. We could hear the water rush out of the tank, and after a few minutes, we were embraced by the guys." The men emerged from the basement as heroes, rejoicing with their colleagues for a job well done. The three men lived longer than the few weeks as rumors stated, and none would die from ARS, contrary to popular belief. It was stated in 2015 that 2 of the men were still alive and working in the sector. Boris Baranov, the third man, died of a heart attack in 2005. According to some estimates, 2 people were killed in the initial explosions, while others claim it was closer to 50. Dozens more people became ill from radiation poisoning, and some died as a result. Between 50 and 185 million curies of radionuclides leaked into the atmosphere, producing several orders of magnitude more radiation than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. This radioactivity was carried by the wind across Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, eventually reaching France and Italy. Millions of acres of forest and farmland were damaged, and despite the evacuation of many thousands of people, hundreds of thousands more remained in hazardous areas. Furthermore, many animals were born malformed in the following years, and thousands of radiation-induced illnesses and cancer deaths were projected in the long run among people. The Chernobyl tragedy fueled criticism of Soviet reactors' risky processes and design shortcomings, and also increased opposition to the construction of new similar units. After a fire in 1991, Chernobyl Unit 2 was decommissioned, but Unit 1 remained operational until 1996. Chernobyl Unit 3 remained operational until 2000, when it was formally dismantled. After the incident, the Soviet Union established a circle-shaped exclusion zone with a radius of about 30 kilometers centered on the nuclear power plant. The exclusion zone encircled the plant and covered approximately 2,634 square kilometers. However, it was later increased to 4,143 square kilometers to encompass strongly radiated areas outside the initial zone. Although no one lives in the exclusion zone, scientists, scavengers, and others may apply for permits to allow them to visit for a limited time. Control of the site went to Ukraine for the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Chernobyl and the abandoned city of Pripyat became popular destinations for so-called dark tourists after the Ukrainian government opened parts of the exclusion zone to organized tour groups in 2011. After a brief but bloody battle, Russian forces attacked from Belarus to Chernobyl during the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Concerns about damage to the containment structure and the prospect of extensive radioactive contamination arose as a result of combat at the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Even though Leatherbarrow's research improved our understanding of the incident, some of the best literature on Chernobyl has yet to be discovered, since Soviet authorities were trying to minimize the disaster and cover it up. Chernobyl's devastation to this day remains a subject of debate over 30 years later. This group of men displayed an extraordinary level of bravery on that fateful day in May 1986, and these actions cannot be debated. They were well aware of the dangers involved and were willing to risk everything to save the lives of an incalculable number of others. Here's the end of today's video. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. If you're a new subscriber, please check out our channel. We are looking forward to sharing more informative videos like this in the future. Until then, stay tuned.